Welcome to the next CTAS clinic. Today we're going to be talking about the Leadership Development Program, but specifically our topic will be on upstream leadership. Now, has anyone actually heard of that term, upstream leadership, before? All right, so what do you think it actually means? What does it make you think about when you hear the term upstream leadership? And I'm tracking the chat if you can't communicate verbally.
When I think of upstream leadership, I'm thinking about I don't know, but the word mainstream comes to life. Like what type of leadership is going on now in the Army?
Okay. So it makes you think of the word mainstream leadership and what's going on right now. Do you want to add to that, Sharon Cabrera?
Yes, I believe that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, I believe it's like upstream. That's my thinking. It's a leader that is up to date. Is up top of his leadership requirements and rules. So that's my take on that.
Okay. So neither one of you are necessarily wrong. Upstream leadership is going to be our phrase we're going to start using for being more proactive, right? The idea of right now, how things go around in our operation and overall in the Army is our commanders tend to look at one thing above all, which is what?
You talking about in regards to readiness?
Yep.
Readiness.
So commanders are concerned with readiness. In order to track our readiness, they look at what?
The metrics.
Excellent. We're looking at metrics, looking at these numbers for our soldiers. You pull data from CSMM and it's saying this amount of people are flagged, this amount of people are on profile, these amount of people are non-MOSQ, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what we tend to do is we have these staff meetings and these reports. The commander looks at these things because they're important. And then we try and react. Well, how do we get these soldiers off of their flags? How do we get these soldiers, MOSQ? How do we get these soldiers, their evaluations done? Because now they're overdue. Well, typically when we're doing this, when we're staying in this consistent reactive nature, when we're stopping to look at these numbers and then respond to the numbers that we're seeing, we're putting a lot of other things down that are setting up for failure. And eventually what we're doing is we're kind of creating this ebb and flow as we're hyper focusing on one specific area because there's some red in our ledger. We're allowing something else that is good to fail. And we go back and forth, and on the soldier side, when we're looking at this from the human domain, the only thing that the soldiers are really patterned behaviorally to understand is as long as they're not in the red, they're good to go, right? As long as they're meeting the status quo, they're at the just good enough level. They're not on someone's radar. They don't really need to concern themselves with everything, and neither do the leaders. Right. If they don't have a soldier that's specifically red in a certain area, a lot of times they're not focusing on how to better develop their soldiers or what their soldiers need because they haven't been told that they need to do something. And that's really going to be one of the fine-tuned aspects that upstream leadership helps refine is the fact that right now, most of our leaders from first line leader up, they are looking at what they need to respond to. And as they stay under that habit of waiting to respond, they're failing to look forward on what needs to happen and what they can do to prevent something from happening in the first place. So with upstream leadership, the idea is getting ahead of the problem, trying to help our soldiers prior to something turning red in the metrics. because we can't just get away from the metrics altogether, right? They're useful quantitative data for us to be able to track different things, but we need to get out in front of the problem in order to better help and serve our soldiers. So for this particular clinic in today's discussion, we're going to be talking about that current paradigm, where we are right now and the way things are currently done. We'll get a little bit deeper into the concepts of what upstream leadership can mean within our environment and at our level. We're going to introduce the classification system that we're going to be going to for our brigade and our H2F system. I discussed this verbally last Thursday when we were at the track for our ACFT training. So we'll get a little bit deeper into that with some numbers for everybody. And then we're going to be talking about how we can use a specific principle, Pareto's principle, to our favor. And if you don't know what that is right now, that's fine. We'll get to it as we get there. But this is where we kind of currently are, right? Now, there's a lot of different metrics that our commanders track, but every week, for those of you that are full-time staff, or every month, we're looking at these numbers and we're being told, you know, these are the number of APFT turning into, of course, eventually ACFT failures. This number of DA3349s, if that's even being tracked at unit level, whether temporary or permanent. You know, how many of your individuals are on the Army Body Composition program? When it comes to annual evaluations, how many of them are due? Where are you at with 350-1 training, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? This is currently what we try and create our list for and say, this is what we need to tackle, put it on battle assembly, you know, get it all done at once. But how do you think we can readdress this kind of current paradigm to try and get ahead of the problem? Do any of you have any ideas?
Yes, I got ideas. So, I mean, I feel like most of the issues come from lack of forecasting. Like you were saying, like we wait for things to become red until we decide to attack it. So like I feel like a good practice is obviously at least you should be taking care of things that's not due during that month that's already red. You should be forecasting at least like 60 days out to get ahead of the curve so you can have buffer room to take care of other things that you may be lacking in. So I feel like that's pretty much the key to staying ahead and on top of things that you may not pay so much attention to.
Okay, perfect. So forecasting, planning, right? And that should be a huge part of operations and training in every single one of our units. And a lot of you are in the operations/training realm, right? As threes or involved with the threes, and see, you know, everything that's coming through, as well as our challenges within our current organization with regards to trying to do efficient planning. But I couldn't agree with you more. Planning and doing that initial forecasting is extremely important. So when we look at the fact that we know it needs to be done, and there's plenty of doctrine and, you know, processes and procedures that show how it can be done, then we need to ask, why isn't it being done? What are your thoughts?
From my perspective, I believe it's prioritization. We need to have that word in our mind.
Do you think it's just not being prioritized?
Yeah, not like we have to use that word like be using what it should be first. What's going to affect more our units, our soldiers, and that's how we have to prioritize every plan that we do so we can be effective.
So that's an interesting point. Prioritization. So we're trying to look at what needs to be the focus, even if we are planning. So let's actually look at that in a historic manner, right? We look at our battle assemblies. We look at a lot of the things that we do. What's one of the things that you see on the screen that almost always gets taken off of battle assembly or not done because it's never prioritized?
I would say probably mandatory training. Like sometimes it's probably not. Well, at least I know I'm within my unit. It's not tracked like how it's supposed to be.
Oh, so that's interesting. And this is where we're going to get into, various processes being different across units, because I would assume it would be the physical fitness aspect. Right, for mandatory training, you typically see, SHARP, EO, suicide awareness, all of the other online and virtual training that we have our soldiers do. It seems like almost on a monthly basis, at least in our organizations. But what I typically don't see very often is physical fitness, predominantly because I don't see a lot of leaders prioritize it, right? Or rather, when they're trying to prioritize their focus, they may think, we need to get these numbers over here down. And how often do we even look at physical fitness numbers for our TPU personnel? Maybe once a year, right, for the actual requirement. And with the transitions we've had with ACFT, COVID, etc., some of our soldiers haven't had to report an actual physical fitness test outside of potentially getting a 705 for PME since late 2019. So we're approaching about 3 years. And with the delay in the diagnostic phase for TPU not starting until October, and you could have soldiers with almost 4 years where they didn't have to have any type of recorded metric for physical fitness. So then, therefore, why would these commanders want to focus on their physical fitness if it's not a reportable metric that they need to prioritize? And with that in mind, and good morning, Sergeant De La Garza. With that in mind, how would you communicate with your commander, rather, if they told you we need to focus on something else right now because PT isn't important?
You said how would they be able to focus on that?
Well, right now, you as a leader, as a CTAS personnel, or just as a leader in general in your organization, you're having a conversation with trying to actually forecast and plan, as Sergeant Watch brought up. You're trying to get ahead of these issues. And so your commander is looking at these metrics, but PT isn't a red metric right now. Your soldiers don't need it as far as, the whole green and red goes. It's not being reported. There's no current record test for them outside of PME. Again, they don't necessarily need one. So you're trying to prioritize efforts. Why would you even do physical training in battle assembly?
Well, I know when it comes to me and my unit, I like to get an overall picture of seeing where my soldiers are at when it comes to physical readiness. So that's why I would still have them doing any type of physical readiness activity.
Okay, well, that's good. But what if your commander tells you they don't want to prioritize physical fitness because it's not something that is currently being tracked? How would you respond?
I would respond with, even though my commander wouldn't say that because he loves PT. I would respond with, well, sir, we can always start today. The sooner we start on it, the better we can help our soldiers out. I'm saying, because at the end of the day, this is gonna get more. To me, I feel like this will be more intense than anything, because on the simple fact that we're going from company physical readiness, or I'm looking at a sense of PRT right now, but we're looking at a sense of company PRT to squad PRT. So you might as well start sooner than later.
That's several really good points on that, and I'm glad that you're actually making that transition. Go ahead, Sergeant Cabrera.
Yeah, in my case, for my commander, I will remind him what's our first mission of the army, which is win a war. So we here try to succeed in a war environment, and one of the priorities is to be in shape, is to be not just to look good in the uniform, it's how to react in a situation of emergency, in a war zone. And I believe we are been forgetting about this. And I believe it's because we didn't have a system or baseline of how to, to have that support. And I will remind that yeah, with this kind of system that we have right now, and with our main goal, which is win a war, we need to implement this every battle assembly.
Good, good. So between what each of you had said, right, making sure we can prepare our soldiers for the future, for everything that's actually changing, making sure that we can actually meet the primary intent of being soldiers, the physical demands of war. And as Sergeant Rivera put in chat, it's still important for them to be able to be physically fit for their mission. I think all of these are extremely valid. And I think most leaders that don't prioritize fitness tend to kind of put fitness in this smaller spectrum, right? They think of physical fitness with, again, what is the metric they need to be reported as? And that's ACFT, which is once a year. They may not attribute physical fitness to how many other things it actually relates to, whether that's the actual soldier's body composition, whether that's a soldier is currently on profile, right? And they need to be able to get off of that profile, whether it's due to them actually being skillful at their actual military occupational specialty. And it's sad because when we don't look at the big picture with regards to the holistic health and fitness, we tend to fail our soldiers in the long run when we tend to stay in this reactive paradigm that we're currently in. So as an example, right now, about 1 in every 5 or 1 of every 6 soldiers throughout our brigade is on some form of a profile, whether temporary or permanent. Maybe I think from the last time I looked at our metrics, it's about 1 out of every 9 soldiers is at least reportedly overweight or obese, which is shocking. That's almost 1 in every squad size element. And those are the ones that, if they're actually being taped right and being taped often, for us to be truly aware of those metrics. And it's extremely unfortunate. What we need to do, well, let me back up. What we have been doing, again, is we've been looking at our soldiers as physical fitness is your individual responsibility. We may be doing physical readiness training and battle assembly if we can fit it in the schedule with everything else being done. And then we eventually have some type of physical fitness test, which again, we haven't had for years now. But we take this physical fitness test, soldiers fail, some soldiers pass, and then what we do is we don't care about the soldiers that passed because they passed. We look at the soldiers that fail and we try and either hopefully give them good resources or tell them the next time and date that they're going to take this test again and hope that they come by and pass. And that's really all we've been doing for the most part as leaders. I'm not saying individuals in this room kind of left it at that. Those of you that have been participating in CTAS usually take a lot more initiative with regards to your soldiers' health. But as a whole, as an organization, that's what we've been doing. Same thing with profiles. When we see these events happen, we typically think, or our soldiers think, they're either older, they had some type of inciting incident, and now they're hurt, and some of them just think they're hurt for life. Where what they don't understand is by performing physical fitness in an efficient manner, which we get through with optimal program design and things of that nature, true physical training helps prehabilitate the body against injury. The less physically active our soldiers are, the more likely they are to be hurt. And then when you do get hurt, because it is almost inevitable within our occupation, if you are not physically fit at a good state of health, when you do get hurt, that injury is likely to be more severe. I mean, this even includes illnesses, right? When it comes to common cold, I can't speak to necessarily COVID because we don't have enough historical data to back up how much physical fitness may kind of prevent that. But we've seen this enough with various cardiovascular disorders, respiratory disorders, and other forms of illnesses that an individual that is well conditioned is less likely to either get sick or injured in the first place, is less likely to have severe symptoms when they are sick or injured, and recover much faster. So it's not just, again, passing the test. We need to make our soldiers more physically resilient, just like we try and focus on their mental resiliency. Then we look at body composition. You don't just go out and have one bad day, right? Eating one day where you're just like getting every calorie you can, every calorie you see, and then you're overweight or obese. It's a slow and gradual process, which means as we're seeing our soldiers, even if it's just once a month, if they weren't already overweight or obese, or if they were kind of in that midline, it's us kind of failing our soldiers as leaders if we're noticing that there's something changing either in their behavioral pattern or something changing with their composition, and all we do is we wait until they fail before we address it. What we haven't been doing is trying to get ahead of that issue. We haven't been trying to see, okay, you know, this is where you were, this is where you currently are, you're approaching that red line, so therefore, what can we do? Right, so as Sergeant Watts brought up earlier, we need to be able to forecast and plan more. Go ahead, Sergeant Completa.
Oh, I'm sorry. Bien, saluding people.
Oh, did you have something to add to that?
No. I'm having people saluting me here. Sorry.
Gotcha. Go ahead, Sergeant Watts.
Yeah, I think like a lot of leadership don't realize, they always say, I don't know if everybody else can agree with this, but I always say like, a PT stud doesn't make good leaders, but I feel like what a lot of leaders forget is that if you have a soldier that's, constantly training, to get fit, they don't realize the psychological aspect and how that translates to every aspect of soldiering. If you have a soldier that's disciplined and conditioned and want to get better, so I feel like they don't look at it from that perspective. It's more or less like, all right, I'm not athletic, I don't care about fitness, so I'm gonna neglect it. It doesn't matter. But they don't look at the like I mentioned before, the psychological aspect and how it enhances every part of your life, like drastically. So
Absolutely, absolutely. We're here to change behaviors, right? When you see someone that's more physically fit, they have established a level of importance with that type of activity, and there are typically there's typically subsequent effects, I should say, as you brought up. Usually they're making better nutrition decisions because they want to add to the physical training that they're doing, right? They don't want to throw that away because of how they're eating. That means that they may also go out and do other activities less, right? That may be detrimental to these other aspects. And we always see this in the Army. The person that's physically fit is usually the one that gets chosen to do a lot of these activities. One, because they're not, generally going to complain about a certain part of, some musculoskeletal injury, such as their back or their knee, when we need them to be able to go move something. And two, they're usually used to that response aspect, right? I need you to do this. Can you do this? Yes. And they just go and they get it done because it's task management, which is what training is. So they've already added that to the behavioral pattern. And there's no way, shape, or form, even in the most ideal setting, where I think that we can get every single soldier to be optimally fit and perfectly conditioned. But we are not addressing it almost at all right now, which is why we're having a lot of these clinics and establishing H2F. I absolutely agree. It's not just getting our soldiers, larger muscles or getting them to run faster, better physical fitness score. As we start to change some of these behaviors and these patterns, it has a huge carryover to their degree of resiliency, to usually their sense of duty and responsibility to these other actions. Absolutely. All right, so that was a discussion on our current paradigm, like how we're currently in this reactive response mode to everything that's going on. But this is where we need to be, right? With upstream leadership, we need to try and see, how do we help our soldiers before they get injured? How do we help them before they become overweight or obese? How are we establishing an environment in which the soldier understands that we care for them, that they have resources, and that they can come to us as as that resource, as that foundation when they sense that there's a problem or a misunderstanding. So for upstream leadership, as you can read, the primary aspect is that we need to be able to advise and educate ourselves, all of our peers, and all the leaders that lead us in whatever methods they can use in order to enable a proactive management of that human domain. Right? We are one of the only organizations where we don't have a product with the hundreds of millions of dollars that really go into what we do, all of the hours, all of the concurrent operations, everything that we're doing. We don't really have a product that we present ourselves or other organizations. What we delve in is humans. We delve with people. That's what we work with. And I think that often gets lost within the weeds when we're looking at these metrics. Our leaders are trying to see, how do we turn this percentage that's currently red and get it 5 points up so that it's no longer red, rather than saying, how do we address the human component and understand these are the behavioral conditions that have potentially caused these numbers to turn red, and then we can have better numbers as a subsequent effect. Right? Often if your soldiers are overweight or obese, that gives you as a leader a large amount of information. Right? First, they're potentially ignorant in how they need to eat, how they need to move. That also tells you that their overall home style environment may not be in an optimal place, because typically you don't only have one individual that's overweight or obese in a household. So if you see your soldier that is overweight or obese and you know they have a family, this could be 1 to 4 people that are now having this potential negative effect where you can help their lives. When people are, again, overweight or obese, just staying this on a main aspect, although we're talking about everything with regards to leadership, that those soldiers are typically suffering more from sleep issues, from musculoskeletal issues, and they're typically also on profile and generally are not as in good physical shape. So you start to see that they're not going to be able to perform their duty as often. They're more likely to get injured in anything that they would actually be doing, and they're at a greater risk of disease and illnesses and things of that nature. But you don't see any of that when you just look at a chart and see this is a number of people that are either on the Army Body Composition Program or not on the Army Body Composition Program. So we need to educate all of the leaders, even down to the first line leader level, or especially down to the first line leader level, because it's the squad leaders that should be looking at their squad and realizing, this soldier isn't performing the way they need to perform. Or just like we talk about with suicide awareness and suicide prevention, this soldier's exhibiting behaviors that are atypical to their normal behaviors. They may be depressed, and if that leader doesn't know why, that leader doesn't know that they're recently unemployed, or that they're struggling with finances, or that they're struggling, through their relationship, or whatever's going on within their life. If that leader doesn't know, that leader can't help them. If that soldier doesn't see that leader as a resource, they just see that leader as a individual that's going to tell them something they need to do while they're in uniform, then we constantly have this broken circle in which we can't help the soldiers because we don't know anything to help them. And then the soldiers don't even know that they're capable of getting help from us. Right. So tying all that together, again, the idea is we need to teach each of our leaders how they can be more proactive in addressing the critical components of their soldiers as humans rather than just looking at metrics. What are your thoughts on some of that so far from anybody? And welcome, Sergeant Pena, Captain Rivera, and Sergeant Ramsey. All right, well, for our H2F system and how we plan on changing the culture with regards to our current reactive nature, there's certain things that we're going to start changing, either our communication, we're going to start changing our labeling system, and how we're going to start focusing on different aspects. And I want to state up front that I don't want any of you at unit level to try and wait for your brigade or your battalions to give you all of the guidelines for things that we're discussing right now on how you can change things. Everything that we're talking about in these clinics are actions that you could initiate now, things that you can start creating group messages for during the week, start talking to your leaders, teaching them the habits, or at least preparing them with the habits of checking in on their soldiers and getting to know their soldiers, and not as a check the block, right? But truly to allow the soldiers to know that they have people that care about them. Ideally, and this is very idealistic, but ideally, as we start to go on month by month and throughout, the next year and a half, I want our soldiers to come to a point where if something happens in their life, whether it's bad or good, say they just took up a new hobby, they just PR'd somewhere, either physical fitness or otherwise, they just had some significant good event in their life. I want our soldiers to get to a point where an event happens, and when they first start thinking, even if it's subconsciously, about the people that they want to inform, the people they want to tell this good news to, I want that to include their family, their close friends, and I want that to include something like their squad leader, their first line leader, who I want them to see from that first name basis. I want them to see that community and that circle wherein they just got a new job and they send out a message to their parents, they send out a message to their siblings, they send out a message to their spouse, they send a message to their first line leader, because they communicate so often that it's established within their behavioral pattern that this is someone I want to confide in. And until we kind of get to that point, we've established that human domain aspect, we're always going to be a little bit behind, right? We need to change our soldiers from thinking about the uniform and battle assembly as a time frame where they need to come in once a month and they just need to react to things that we're going to tell them to do, and instead get them to understand that there's a whole system set up for them with resources that they can come to. They're allowed to come on base, more than just those 2 days and train at the MWR gym. The MWR, especially here at Fort Buchanan, does a ridiculous amount of constant events, more than a lot of MWRs I've seen in other installations, and they are always lacking in participation from our soldiers, and it's for them and their family members. And I think often it's because people want to separate work and life, which I completely agree with, but we don't want them thinking about some of these extra activities and some of the things we're doing for them as work. And I think a lot of times they don't see that because they don't understand that we care about that human domain as much, which we're trying to establish. And good morning to everyone that just came in. So for upstream leadership, to kind of get back to the topic here, we are going to now discuss how we're going to get into this 4-tiered classification system, how we're going to be moving forward instead of just looking at a red and green for metric and modifying that, and further discuss how we can better serve our soldiers by being proactive. So from what we discussed in our current paradigm earlier on in this clinic, this is where we're going to be going, at least with regards to ACFT and Army Body Composition Program. However, these metrics or this classification system applies to every other form of a metric that our commanders are currently looking at. So right now, as aforementioned, we have green and red, right? If your soldier fails the APFT or the ACFT, then they are red. If they pass, even if they had 60 points across the board, then they're green, and that's it. And this opens up a huge room for failure for us as leaders, because what we typically don't focus on is that green. And you could have a lot of soldiers that are struggling and that need a lot of help that could be borderline or otherwise, even though they are currently green. We need to get ahead of that problem. So with the classification system, we're going to be breaking this down into 4 tiers. Red is still going to be generally the same, right? An individual that is not meeting the standard that we've established or that the Army's established. So in this case, for the CFT, that would be that they cannot score the minimum, which is 60 points in each event. So if they have 59 points in one or more events, they will automatically be enrolled through our holistic health and fitness system and our physical readiness training program into some type of reconditioning or rehabilitation program that their CTAS member, a lot of the individuals in this room, will be able to assist them with. However, moving forward, if a soldier does score between 60 and 75 points for their particular biological sex and for their particular age group, we're going to be labeling them as amber. What we need amber to be for every first line leader, for every first sergeant, for every commander, is to understand that this is a warning metric. If a soldier is scoring within this amber platform, they are still going to be enrolled in some form of a reconditioning program. It won't be the same as those that are currently failing the program, because those individuals need a lot more work. But we need the leaders to understand that if a soldier scoring within this spectrum, they're still at a significant risk of not only failing the test, but a significant risk of injury. They're not as prehabilitated as we need them to be against movements and against all of these actions that they're going to be able to perform. And for the soldiers, as we establish this and we communicate this effectively, what this hopefully does is in the long run, lets the soldiers know that not that they're being punished for scoring 60 to 75 points, but there's the reason for those numbers are to give an indication of the soldiers' overall health and readiness. And I'm sure you've seen this a lot, right? Where your soldiers, if they are going to take the ACFT, or even if it was the APFT, they go out there and they do the bare minimum because all they need to do is hit 60 points in the event. And, you know, that's it. They're not going to be flags. They don't need to worry about it. And often that lack of care comes from the lack of the leader providing purpose and direction for what those numbers actually mean. What we'll do from that point is we'll go into green. So our green statuses will be modified instead of just being everyone that passes for the ACFT rather to be 76 to 89 points, right? It's not that we don't need to focus on these soldiers, but we want to identify that these soldiers have at least reached a degree of fitness and a degree of health that is where they're more prehabilitated against injury, right? They're more protected against injury. And then, of course, we want to give some type of platform with regards to accolades and recognition to those that do go above and beyond. So we'll create a gold status for soldiers that are performing greater than or equal to 90 points in each event, because we need to be able to recognize a lot of the hard work and time and effort that they've put in order to accomplish that. Any thoughts on this classification system for the ACFT so far? All right, so moving into how that works with the Army Body Composition program. And this one, I know can get a bit touchy, but we've discussed this in our nutrition classes and body composition classes for H2F under CTAS so far, wherein the body composition is not just an important metric with regards to aesthetics, right? How someone looks in uniform. Although that's also important from a professionalism standpoint and is in Army regulation. Right, the Army regulation for AR 600-9 does state that your commander can just look at a soldier. If they don't look like they're professional due to their body composition, can have them taped at any point in time. Right, so that is regulatory guidelines and within the commander's capabilities. But outside of that, again, dealing with the human domain, we've discussed that every extra percentage of body fat that an individual holds on them increases the risk of cancer, increases the risk of dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is the highest factor, or the greatest multiplier for all-cause mortality that we have in life, period. And it's extremely unfortunate. You look at the US in general, one of the main reasons we can't get more soldiers into the Army, the biggest thing holding soldiers back from even joining is our overweight and obesity epidemic that we have going on. We're almost at a 50% metric within the United States, which means we're almost at a point where 1 in every 2 people are at least overweight, and then at least 30% of those that are also obese. It's an extreme issue, so much so that it is technically considered a national security issue because we are an all-volunteer force. And addressing the civilian component before they come in is an entirely different metric. But for the soldiers that we currently have, it's always heartbreaking to me because many of them just don't understand what got them there. Or they don't understand what they need to do in order to move on. And I say that with, not saying that they're completely ignorant with regards to health. I don't doubt that any of our soldiers that are overweight or obese understand what foods may be more beneficial to them than others, but that obviously doesn't translate into positive behaviors. Just because a soldier may know that this food may be a better choice than this other food in these situations, if the understanding of that was all they needed, then they wouldn't be in the situation that they're in. So we see that our soldiers are typically overweight or obese are also those that, as aforementioned, are suffering from sleep issues, are suffering from certain types of joint and musculoskeletal pain. They're also the ones that are higher risk of suicide. They're typically suffering from financial issues, typically suffering from depression and family issues, et cetera, because the behavioral patterns that they've established within their own degree of self-efficacy, their own degree of their own self-image, a lot of that gets degraded so much that it carries over into everything else. So Sergeant Watts brought up earlier with regards to physical fitness and looking at PT as a metric or as a priority, it's not just about having higher PT scores. Physical training has a huge variety, just a large scope of positive benefits. So when we talk about helping our soldiers, we need them to understand, one, of course, they don't even need to do physical training to be able to lose weight, right? It's just making better dietary choices, which typically also helps out financially. I've never really understood when I've taught soldiers nutrition over the last about decade or so. And when I ask about barriers to losing weight, how many individuals actually raise their hand and say that, well, eating healthy is more expensive. And that couldn't be further from the case, either short-term or long-term. And this is shown, time after time after time again with different forms of studies. But very often when an individual thinks that healthy eating is more expensive, that also belies their misunderstanding of what foods are quote unquote healthy. But bringing all this back to the classification system, as you've no doubt actually read on screen as I've been talking, what we want to go to with Army body composition is if a soldier fails, similar to the ACFT, then they're red, right? That's a clear, easy metric. We need to be able to address their flag, their monthly weigh-ins, etc. Just follow regulation for that. However, if they're male and they're within 3% of their age group standard, then we'll put them in amber, and 6% for female. And this is because if you actually look at 600-9 and the body composition that's allowed, again, not doing with height and weight, not doing with body mass index, so BMI, but dealing with the actual tape test. If a male is within 3% of the standard, they're already going to be at the overweight line. So that 3% amber range allows us to see that, yes, you pass, but you're still at a greater risk of everything we've already talked about. And the same thing for females. And I'm going to say this again. I'm going to say this in every single time we talk about this for the Army metric. And I'm trying to communicate with the parties that are involved with this to get this to eventually change. But if you look at the actual Army regulation on our female standards for body composition, the lowest percentage allowed for females to pass is 30%. For a 17-year-old female right now in the Army, if a 17-year-old female is 30% body fat, she passes. Now, 30% body fat means that that individual is already obese, not overweight, because 25% is overweight, but obese. So with our standards right now, if we have a 17-year-old female, that individual coming into the Army can be overweight, or excuse me, can be obese, needs to do less than 10 push-ups, and can run for, I think it's like 23 minutes on a mile. And that's the minimum standards that we're saying, yes, it's okay, you're physically fit. And that's just not good enough. And so since we have the capability within our organization to do so, we're not going to treat that as good enough. Now, we're not going to flag an individual that's passing, right, because that goes against regulation, but we need to enroll them in our nutrition classes, in our body composition classes, our physical fitness classes, so we can start changing their understanding, and then therefore, and educate their leaders so we can start working on their behavioral patterns, so they understand why they need to modify that composition. And I'm not going to go through all the numbers on here. The general gist is for green, I modified the percentages so that it's not too extreme, right? We're not trying to say every male needs to be less than 10% body fat. In fact, I didn't even go that far for gold. And then same thing for females. In fact, we don't really want our females being anything less than 18% body fat. That's way, way, way too low, especially for a soldier, unless they want to participate in bodybuilding, figure physique, and those type of things, right? Those individual metrics are different. But you'll notice in the female body fat percentages, they're going down to about 20%, where in the males, they go down to about 5%, because our females do need a lot more body fat percentage on them, but we still don't really want to encourage them to be overweight or obese. But I want to know your thoughts on this new classification system that we're going to be going to, and how you can use it within your ranks, or any type of issues you may see with regards to using this in your ranks. So open floor to anyone that wants to communicate.
Hey, this is Sarmon. I would say, obviously, um, this classification system, somebody Mike's hot. I would say ultimately this classification system will be great for use. Of course, the people who are in amber and red, you can make sure the squad leaders are paying more attention to these soldiers to better shape them on scoring better. Of course, you're gonna still help the green and gold soldiers out, but with this classification system, you get a better viewpoint on things where soldiers at compared to regular point systems that we've been using. Same thing for the Army body composition part. Back then we didn't, from what I've experienced, it's really just been pass or go, or some soldiers didn't even get tape at all that that needed to get tape. So I see that this whole new classification system is a pretty good idea. And I see it looks like it's a little leeway too on the body composition.
That's good. Thank you so much for that. I think that this would be beneficial all around. And like you said, involving the squad leaders would be very important. We want our soldiers to know, again, one, that we care, two, that they have resources. And we want to change their understanding of what these numbers mean. We don't want our soldiers thinking, oh, I have to get taped, right? Let's just screw it. We have the time, do proper planning. Everyone gets taped, because that's really the only test that needs to happen. Now, do you need to tape everyone all the time? No, not necessarily, especially those that are already within that green and gold. But we need to make that a better patterning of the height and weight is a screening tool. We need those numbers for the total calculations. Other than that, tape is the actual test. And then not only that, but what does that information mean? Right, this 25% being overweight and 30% being obese isn't the Army standard. That's just general health worldwide, and an understanding that, again, every percentage over that, they're at a greater risk of injury, sickness, illness, disease, everything. But Thank you for your thought. Anyone else have any thoughts on this classification system? And it could be positive or negative. I'm always open to feedback. All right. Well, again, this classification system that I listed here for just ABCP and ACFT, this is the idea for upstream leadership that we need to try and apply toward every other form of reportable metric that we generally have. And it's been in place in some way or another for different Army systems, right? If you look at our annual evaluations, not only do you need, of course, your quarterly counseling that should be done, but you have your benchmarks of all of these checks before your NCR or OER becomes due for things that you're supposed to have done. Same thing with our normal 350-1 training, right? Our squad leaders should know within that kind of 30, 60, 90, if we want to use that as a format, when their soldiers are going to be due, so that they can plan and prioritize communication with their soldiers prior to an individual turning red. And that's really the overall scope of upstream leadership. Some soldiers will turn red. We can't prevent that and on any of our metrics, right? That's going to happen. But how do we do our best diligence with regards to preventing that from happening rather than responding to soldiers' events after they've already turned red? So moving forward with that to one of the last main aspects we're going to be talking about, and it encompasses everything else we've already discussed, it's kind of turning this well-known principle into something that can generally help us out. So Pareto's principle, for those of you that have never heard of it or have never heard of it titled that way, is the general 80-20 principle that we've seen and observed in pretty much every aspect of life and science. It's actually quite eerie if you wanted to dig down the rabbit hole one day just out of your own curiosity as to the 80-20 rule. And you hear about it with regards to grocery shopping. You hear about it with regards to learning. You hear it with regards to business. But when you look at, long-term aspects of almost anything that we can research, comes back to general 80-20 rule. But again, I'm not going to turn this into a Pareto's Principles class. But what we are going to try and do for understanding how we're going to modify these metrics is what you see on screen. Right now, we're almost 90% reactive. We wait for a soldier to get injured, we initiate a profile for them, and we leave them be. We wait for a soldier to get overweight and become obese, and then we put them on Army body composition program and track that after the point. We always wait for things to fail before we're doing things in order to address it. So for upstream leadership, what we need to be able to do is be approximately 40% proactive, 20% active, and then we're always going to have a reactive component. That's just life. We need to be able to respond to things. So that last 20% will come into us being reactive. But I want to keep this as communication and an open forum between myself and everyone within the room. So what are some ways you think we can be proactive from the areas that we've discussed already? What falls under the proactive category?
Well, this that's our Lenny. One thing I can say that we could try to do, as far as and this will fall directly on the platoon sergeant at this point. As far as one, seeing and making aware of, you can tell like if your soldier is losing weight or gaining weight. So you will be able to see, as far as in just keep trying to tape them or keep trying to, put them in that room to make sure that they're meeting the standards. it shouldn't be the Army standards as far as in just trying to do it every 6 months to check the block. It should be, like I said, that one-on-one understanding where your soldier is going, regardless of if it's decrease or increase in weight or body fat when you tape them, and just I guess just the consistency of trying to make sure, checking on your soldier at this point, because like I said, the reactive phase is sort of the little too late phase as far as in trying to correct something, because they can some soldiers just don't get it, as far as in you can give them all the right tools and they still either not being able. But I guess if you catch it in the early phase, yeah, I guess it give them a better chance, or they understand what's going on, so whatever they might have started doing or might stop doing, that they have them in that correct or healthy body percent fatted body percent. Like I said, I guess that's a way, just being engaged and like constantly actually directly visually and still taping your soldiers, like knowing their goal.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Sergeant Latney. Does anyone else have an idea of what would fall under the proactive realm, or the differences between being proactive and active with regards to these percentages? All right, well, Sergeant Latney brought up several of them. So as an idea, this is kind of how we're going to break this down, at least in general concepts. Our proactive aspect is us, as we discussed before, and Sergeant Watts has brought this up, but our planning, right, our forecasting, our ability to see something before it's going to go wrong is essential. And we have a lot of planning that goes around here, but we just need to be able to reframe that planning with regards to the human domain for our leaders and help them do the same, right? Whenever our squad leaders are expecting the platoon sergeants, the first sergeant, or the full-time staff to tell them what needs to be done and to tell them where their soldiers are, they've already failed, right? They're already in that reactive nature. We need our squad leaders having enough information and communication, that open dialogue, even throughout the week outside of battle assembly with their soldiers, that allows the squad leader to plan. The platoon sergeant should be getting updates from their squad leaders, excuse me, on the status of their soldiers. Right now, we're doing it the complete opposite in an ineffective way, where everything's coming down from the top. We're having the full-time staff and the commanders tell the rest of the leaders where their soldiers are, which is unacceptable. The other aspect of being proactive is educating, like we're doing now. So that's peer-to-peer leadership education. This is the CTAS member, the H2F personnel within the platoon, communicating with each other H2F member and educating the squad leaders and the platoon sergeants, as well as the commander, so they can make better decisions from the top. And then that leads into better scheduling. When do we, within this planning aspect, need to have a educational clinic? When do we need to set aside time for that squad leader during battle assembly to communicate with their soldiers? All of that's going to be our proactive piece. Our active piece is the regular communication that's going to be happening outside of and within battle assembly. As aforementioned, we need to get to a point where our squad leaders are having a regular group chat with their squad members, or even the one-on-one chats, where they know things that are going on in that squad member's life. And this is all the way up to, the HHC, HHD level. We should know each other on that personal level. That's the degree of professionalism that every form of higher level learning in the Army has evolved to, right? Knowing each other's first name, communicating each other by first name, and really getting to a point where we understand this soldier's behaviors. And that carries over to many different things, right? Not just overall productivity within the office, but one of the biggest aspects of understanding issues that commonly go on with SHARP, EO, and suicide awareness and prevention is the fact that you need to know that person's regular behaviors. You need to know who they are as a person, rather than just communicating to them when things need to get done. And then, of course, following up on progress. One of the biggest and most important things as a leader isn't just saying, oh, this needs to be done, and then backing off, right? We need to get to a point where our soldiers know that when that leader brings up something to them, they're also going to follow up, which requires them communicating during the week. Lastly, on that will be the actual training process as well, right? When with regards to education, we actually get to physical training, when we get to teaching people how to do this, how to do that. That's all of the active aspects of our leadership. And then the reactive is everything else. So the reactive aspect are our reconditioning programs, right? So when a soldier already gets injured, or the soldier is pregnant, or they're postpartum, how do we put them in a reconditioning program? They failed the they failed the Army Combat Fitness Test, or they're amber for any of these things. We need to see, these are the soldiers we need to therefore give a special emphasis on both the education and the overall resources for, in order to help them get better, right? Help them understand how to improve their daily habits. And with that, I also put the holistic rally, which that's going to comprise of various operations that we're going to be doing from the brigade level, kind of moving forward on how we pull everything from the 5 domains of H2F in for our soldiers. To give you an example of that, this is kind of what's currently in the pipeline. Right, so you see 5 operation names on here. Some of these you may have heard me either speak about before, at least slightly, but may have not seen any paperwork on yet. I know for Operation Phoenix, we're actually going to be discussing that within one of our clinics this month. But you have Operation Dream Team, and I put them at the kind of points for this Pentagon for H2F, because they encompass those particular domains more than anything else. So you have Operation Dream Team. We're going to be coming, that will be coming for the brigade between June and July, which is going to involve addressing mental health and spiritual readiness, and sleep with regards to our brigade. We are already communicating with actually the brigade and battalion chaplains in order to establish a team to help with both the mental and spiritual readiness for our soldiers. That was something we were going to discuss last week on Tuesday during our mindfulness clinic that we weren't able to do. You see Operation the Cook's Book. That's going to be for both sleep and nutrition readiness. And I'm not going to get into tons of details of each of these operations at this moment, but within that, we're actually going to be developing a series of, we'll just say, optimal recipes and things of that nature, things that both taste good, look good. And I really want to focus on the culture of Puerto Rico when we do this, to be able to say, to pull from our soldiers, pull ideas from the soldiers, and then therefore give the resource to everyone else of, these are ways to take dishes that you already have in the home that you regularly enjoy, things that are special to your culture, things that are special to you, and modify different variables to make sure that they retain their historic nature, but they also help attribute to your overall readiness, right? So you can still eat, enjoy, but be fit, right? That's the kind of the bottom line up front for that. Operation Pound for Pound is going to encompass our nutrition readiness and physical readiness for those domains. Some of you may have heard this already. This isn't becoming between September and December. There's going to be various aspects of it, but eventually this is going to be a installation-wide kind of competition, a trifold competition involving a powerlifting competition. That's your squat, bench, and deadlift, potentially a rock mark competition, and a foot march competition rather, and then kind of a circuit. If you have ever seen or been to kind of a Spartan Games, picture that, but at Maxie Williams Field, with events also for spouses to compete against one another, and even for children to be able to compete. There's going to be a lot composed of this, but just something to look out for. Operation Phoenix is the one that's coming up right around the corner. There's going to be us communicating actually with First MSC surgeons in order to completely revamp our current profile system within our brigade. So we need to be able to pull everyone's current profile. Most of them are out of date and are therefore invalid. and then try and fix that to not only be valid, right, but set up the actual 3 levels of reconditioning for our HPIP program, and set up the classes to help soldiers eventually get off of profile. Right? This is a long-term progress, but it's process, but it's going to start now. Operation Tell Your Story. It's going to mix most of the domains, but primarily spiritual and mental readiness. This is going to be coordination with PAO in order to reach out to you and your soldiers, in which we want to hear stories of significant change. This could be someone that saw a significant increase in their physical readiness because they, maybe they never worked out before. Something motivated them and they went out and they ran a marathon, or they started lifting weights and competed, or it could be that they lost a lot of body fat due to whatever motivation. This could be a soldier that was contemplating suicide, and they just had that one conversation with a leader that changed their mind. Anything that we normally talk about within this entire spectrum of H2F, we want to start gathering stories from our soldiers so that they understand that we're listening to them, that we appreciate the efforts that have already been put forth. And we're kind of going to continue that moving forward because we want our soldiers to know that we're always paying attention, that we care about them moving forward. But anyway, these are 5 of the currently planned operations for this rest of this physical year, because it's going to go into the next FY as well. But any initial thoughts, considerations, or concerns with regards to these operations? All right, I was expecting a little bit of conversation on that, but I understand that some of you, or if not a lot of you, are putting this clinic on to be able to passively listen rather than to actively participate, because there's a lot of things going on. So I do appreciate you being here, even if you can't communicate verbally. All right, so this will be our last actual slide on this clinic. This one, of course, I'm trying to involve this in every single one of our clinics, because it's not just about me presenting what's coming to you or sharing different information, but I need to constantly get feedback from you as well, as well as track your comprehension on things that we've talked about. So again, I know that some of you are just passively listening, but for those of you that are not, and you can communicate through chat or verbally, of course, a verbal medium helps a lot more for the recording, but how can we take some of these principles from upstream leadership and apply them to our units right now? What do you think, Sergeant De La Garza, if you're there? How can we apply the principles of upstream leadership into our current elements? All right. Well, if we're at that point where everyone's also actively engaged in other activities, then we'll go ahead and bring this one to a close. So I want to thank everyone for participating in this bi-weekly clinic for our H2F program, or the Comprehensive Tactical Athlete System. Today we discussed Upstream Leadership, in which we are planning to take this reactive paradigm that we currently exist in and modify it in a way that we can become more proactive. We want to make sure that we can address our soldiers' needs and readiness, everything that they require in order to not only be optimal soldiers, be good human beings, right? And this, of course, goes across all 5 domains of H2F. We need to look at both physical and non-physical components for our soldiers, what they're doing in and out of uniform in order to help them live their best lives, and help them appreciate the fact that we are there for them and that we are here as leaders to serve them. That is always the capacity we need to get them to understand moving forward. So I appreciate all of you coming today and participating, whether passively or actively. And we will be continuing our next conversation on Thursday, same place, same time. This Thursday, we're going to be discussing the enduring warrior, in which we will be covering cardiovascular conditioning in a different mindset. So we'll be talking about programming, we'll be talking about the importance of it, why soldiers don't often do it, as well as why we need to potentially shift some of the focuses on how we're addressing training, due to, again, the cascade of effects that can happen from the lack of that particular modality. But I hope all of you have a fantastic day. I'm going to end the recording, but I'll still stick around for any type of conversations that you want to have. For those of you who have to go, again, thank you, and I will see you on Thursday.
See you.